Modern armored columns aren't supposed to die in 11 minutes. Not in 2026. Not with drone reconnaissance. Not with thermal imaging and satellite coverage updated every 40 minutes. A 14-tank formation supported by infantry fighting vehicles has enough firepower to level a small town. It has enough armor to absorb dozens of hits from small arms and shrapnel. It has enough mass to bulldoze through defensive lines that took weeks to build. But mass means nothing when you're trapped on a single road, and firepower means nothing when the enemy sees you first. February 9th, 2026. Southeastern approach to Pokrovsk. Dawn. Temperature -11 Celsius. Visibility 400 meters. Dropping. 14 T-72B3 tanks and 6 BMP, 2 infantry fighting vehicles, pushed forward through freezing fog. Their objective was a corridor southeast of Pokrovsk, a stretch of road Russian intelligence had assessed as thinly defended, maybe undefended entirely. That assessment was wrong, catastrophically wrong. I'm your host at Navy Battlefront, where we break down the most critical military operations shaping global power. Today, we're reconstructing one of the most devastating armored ambushes of the entire war, an 11-minute engagement that turned a reinforced battalion task force into burning scrap metal on a frozen Ukrainian road. Because what happened southeast of Pokrovsk wasn't just a tactical defeat. It was a case study in how anti-tank warfare has fundamentally changed, and why sending a column of tanks down a single road in 2026 might be the most dangerous order a commander can give. To understand what happened that morning, you have to understand what the Russians were trying to do, and why they believed it would work. By late January 2026, Russian forces had been grinding toward Pokrovsk for months. The city sits on a critical logistics node: rail lines, highway intersections, supply depots that feed Ukrainian positions across a 60-kilometer front. Taking Pokrovsk, or even getting close enough to interdict its supply routes, would force Ukraine to restructure its entire defensive posture in western Donetsk. Russian command had identified what they called the Pokrovsk Corridor, a stretch of relatively open terrain southeast of the city, where Ukrainian defensive density appeared lowest. Satellite imagery from late January showed minimal trench construction. Signals intelligence detected limited radio traffic. Ground reconnaissance patrols in the first week of February reported no significant contact. On February 6th, Russian Orlan 10 drones conducted a dedicated surveillance sweep of the corridor. The drones flew standard patterns, thermal and optical, covering the road and surrounding fields. Their footage was analyzed at brigade level. The assessment: no fortified positions, no vehicle concentrations, no anti-tank obstacles, a gap in the Ukrainian line. That assessment reached the 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division headquarters within hours. The operations staff began planning an armored push. The concept was straightforward: send a reinforced company through the corridor at dawn, exploit the gap, establish positions that could threaten Pokrovsk's southeastern approach, and force Ukraine to divert reserves from other sectors. The plan had a name: Operation Zhelezny Kulak, Iron Fist. It was approved in less than 48 hours. What Russian intelligence missed wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. The 93rd Mechanized Brigade, one of Ukraine's most experienced combat formations, had been preparing this kill zone for 3 days before the Russian drones ever flew overhead. 4 anti-tank guided missile teams had infiltrated positions along a tree line running parallel to the corridor road. The tree line sat 1.2 kilometers from the road's center line, well within the effective range of both the Stugna-P and the British NLAW systems the teams carried. The teams moved in on foot during the night of February 3rd. No vehicles, no heavy equipment. Each 4-man team carried its launcher system, ammunition, camouflage netting, and 3 days of rations. They dug into prepared positions that had been scouted weeks earlier, covered their fighting holes with thermal masking blankets, and went silent. Complete radio silence. No electronic emissions of any kind. Communication between the teams and their battalion headquarters was maintained through hardwired field telephones, copper wire laid along the ground, invisible to electronic surveillance, impervious to jamming. A technology from the First World War, repurposed for the age of drone warfare. When the Russian Orlan 10s swept the area on February 6th, the Ukrainian teams were already in position. They didn't move, didn't transmit. Their thermal signatures were masked. Their positions blended into the tree line. The drones saw exactly what the Ukrainians wanted them to see. Nothing. This is the part that matters for understanding modern warfare. The Russians didn't fail because they lacked technology. They failed because they trusted technology to do what only human judgment can do: interpret absence. An empty battlefield doesn't mean an unoccupied battlefield. The absence of visible defenses doesn't mean the absence of defenses. Every intelligence analyst learns this in training. But under pressure, with command demanding results and timelines compressing, the distinction between "we see nothing" and "nothing is there" collapses. The Orlan 10 footage showed no Ukrainian presence. The staff officers interpreted that as confirmation of a gap. They drew up the plan. They briefed the commander. They committed 20 armored vehicles and over 100 soldiers to a road that led straight into a prepared kill zone. February 9th, 5:47 local time. The column departed its assembly area. The formation was standard Soviet doctrine: tanks in a staggered column, BMPs interspersed, spacing approximately 50 meters between vehicles. The lead tank was commanded by a senior lieutenant who had been in theater for 4 months. The column commander, a captain, rode in the 5th vehicle back. Fog lay heavy across the corridor. Visibility fluctuated between 300 and 500 meters. The column commander considered this an advantage. The fog would mask their approach from any Ukrainian observation posts. He was half right. The fog did reduce visual detection range, but it also meant the column was blind to what waited ahead. And 1.2 kilometers away, Ukrainian gunners didn't need to see the tanks with their eyes. They had something better. The Stugna-P system uses a remote-controlled launcher with a thermal sight. The gunner operates from a position up to 50 meters from the launcher itself, connected by cable. The thermal channel cuts through fog, smoke, and darkness. At 1.2 kilometers, a T-72B3 appears as a bright white rectangle on the thermal display. Unmistakable, trackable, impossible to hide. The Ukrainian teams had designated their positions Alpha through Delta, spread across 800 meters of tree line. Each team had pre-assigned sectors of fire. Each had calculated range to multiple reference points along the road: fence posts, a burned-out tractor, a distinctive tree stump. At 6:14, Team Alpha's thermal sight picked up the first contact. A bright signature moving along the road, then a second, a third. The team leader counted 14 large signatures and 6 smaller ones, 20 vehicles total, moving at approximately 25 kilometers per hour. He reported by field phone. One word: Kelowna. The Battalion Fire Coordination Center received the report and passed execution authority to the ambush commander, a major from the 93rd Brigade who had planned this engagement for over 2 weeks. The major's order was simple: wait for the lead vehicle to reach reference point 3, the burned tractor, 1.4 kilometers into the kill zone. Then fire. 6:18. The lead T-72B3 reached reference point 3. The major gave the command. Team Alpha fired first. A Stugna-P missile launched from its concealed position, its tandem warhead designed to defeat explosive reactive armor. The missile covered 1.2 kilometers in just over 4 seconds. It struck the lead tank on the upper hull, just below the turret ring. The tandem warhead detonated, first charge stripping the ERA tiles, second charge penetrating the base armor. The T-72B3 lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from the turret hatches. 3 seconds later, Team Delta, positioned at the far end of the ambush line, fired at the rear of the column. A second Stugna-P missile hit the last BMP-2 in the formation, detonating its ammunition storage. The vehicle erupted in a column of flame visible through the fog. The column was now blocked. Lead vehicle burning, rear vehicle destroyed, a single road with frozen mud on both shoulders. Classic killbox. The column commander's first instinct was correct. He ordered an immediate dispersal off the road. But the ground had been freezing and thawing for weeks. The road shoulders looked solid, but concealed mud beneath a thin crust of ice. The first tank that attempted to leave the road sank to its hull in frozen mire within 20 meters. A second bogged down, trying to bypass the burning lead tank. Team Bravo engaged the fifth vehicle in the column, the command tank. The NLAW system, designed for shorter engagements, was employed at its near maximum effective range. The missile used a predicted line-of-sight guidance system and an overfly top-attack warhead, striking the thinnest armor on the turret roof. The command tank's turret blew off its ring. A catastrophic ammunition detonation, the autoloader's carousel of 125mm rounds cooking off in a chain reaction that sent the turret 30 meters into the air. The column commander and his crew died instantly. The formation was now leaderless, blocked, and under fire from multiple directions across a frontage they couldn't even see. The fog that was supposed to protect them now trapped them in a white void where missiles arrived without warning. Team Charlie engaged a BMP-2 that had stopped to dismount infantry. The vehicle was stationary, an easy target. The Stugna-P missile struck the front glossus, penetrating the thin aluminum armor and detonating inside the troop compartment. 6 minutes into the engagement, 5 vehicles destroyed or burning. The remaining 15 were attempting to reverse, but a column reversal on a narrow road is one of the most chaotic maneuvers in armored warfare. Tanks were colliding with BMPs. Drivers who couldn't see through the fog were smashing into vehicles behind them. 2 tanks locked tracks trying to turn in the confined space. The Ukrainian teams continued firing. Each team had brought 3 missiles. They had 12 shots total for 20 targets. They didn't need to hit every vehicle. They needed to create enough destruction to immobilize the column. By 6:23, 9 minutes after the first shot, 8 armored vehicles were destroyed or disabled. 6 were burning. 2 had thrown tracks attempting to leave the road. The remaining 12 were clustered in a 600-meter stretch of road, engines running, crews desperately trying to find a way out. The anti-tank teams had expended 10 of their 12 missiles. They had achieved their primary objective. The column was fixed. Now, the second phase began. Ukrainian FPV drone operators from a support unit positioned 3 kilometers to the northwest had been monitoring the engagement via a relay drone overhead. The moment the anti-tank teams reported mission complete, the drone teams launched. First-person view kamikaze drones, small, fast, cheap, carrying shaped charge warheads designed to penetrate the top armor of tanks. They cost a fraction of a guided missile, and they were devastating against stationary targets. The first wave of 8 FPV drones arrived over the kill zone at 6:26. The drone operators could see the column clearly on their screens. Burning vehicles marking the extent of the ambush, surviving tanks clustered together, infantry scattered on the road. The drones dove. Each operator selected a target and guided the drone manually into the vehicle's most vulnerable point: engine decks, open hatches, turret roofs. The shaped charges were small, but precisely placed. 3 more vehicles were hit in the first drone wave. A T-72B3 took a drone strike on its engine deck and caught fire. A BMP-2 was struck through an open rear hatch where infantry had been dismounting. Russian soldiers who had abandoned their vehicles were now in the open. Some sought cover in roadside ditches. Others attempted to move toward the tree line, not knowing that the tree line concealed the very teams that had ambushed them. Ukrainian mortar teams from the 93rd Brigade had pre-registered fire missions on the Corridor Road. The coordinates had been calculated weeks earlier. When the Battalion Fire Coordination Center transmitted the fire mission, the mortar crews didn't need to adjust. They loaded and fired. 82mm mortar rounds began impacting along the road at 6:29. The barrage was precise, walking fire along the 600-meter stretch where surviving vehicles and dismounted infantry were concentrated. Intercepted Russian radio communications from the engagement paint a picture of total chaos. The battalion commander, a lieutenant colonel monitoring from a command post 4 kilometers behind the column, was screaming on the radio for air support. Helicopter gunships, fixed-wing close air support, anything. The requests went unanswered. Russian helicopter units in the sector had been pulled back to rear staging areas after losing 2 K-52 attack helicopters to Ukrainian air defense systems the previous week. The nearest available air support was 40 minutes away. The ambush would be over in 11. At 6:29, the lieutenant colonel ordered any surviving vehicles to abandon the road and move cross-country. This was a desperation command. He knew the terrain was impassable for heavy armor, but remaining on the road meant certain destruction. 2 T-72B3s attempted to break through the frozen fields to the east, both bogged down within 100 meters. Their crews abandoned them and fled on foot. A third tank, its commander apparently wounded, drove straight off the road at speed and rolled into a drainage ditch, coming to rest on its side. The crew did not emerge. At 6:29, 11 minutes after the first Stugna-P missile was fired, the engagement was effectively over. 8 armored vehicles were confirmed destroyed. 3 more were immobilized and abandoned. The remaining vehicles had scattered, some reversing down the road, others stuck in the mud. A few simply stopped with their engines running, and no one inside. Ukrainian after-action assessments documented the results with precision. 8 confirmed vehicle kills, 5 T-72B3 tanks and 3 BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles. 3 additional vehicles immobilized and later destroyed by follow-up FPV drone strikes. Russian personnel casualties were estimated at 40 to 60, including the column commander and at least 2 other officers. Ukrainian casualties from the engagement, 0. The 93rd Brigade's anti-tank teams withdrew from their positions that evening after dark, using the same foot routes they had used to infiltrate 3 days earlier. They carried their spent launcher tubes and remaining ammunition. They left nothing behind except empty fighting positions. The Corridor Road remained impassable for 72 hours. Russian recovery vehicles couldn't reach the destroyed column because the road was now registered as an active kill zone. Ukrainian artillery engaged 2 recovery attempts, destroying a BREM-1 armored recovery vehicle and forcing the crews of a second to abandon it. The wreckage sat on that road for weeks. Satellite imagery confirmed at least 11 burned-out hulks, still visible as of late February. The road became a symbol, circulated on Ukrainian military channels, analyzed in Western defense publications, studied at staff colleges. The operational consequences extended far beyond 11 minutes and 20 vehicles. Russian command in the sector suspended all armored operations along the southeastern approach to Pokrovsk for 19 days. The pause allowed Ukrainian forces to reinforce the corridor with additional anti-tank positions, minefields, and observation posts. The gap that Russian intelligence had identified no longer existed, if it ever had. At the strategic level, the ambush forced a reassessment of Russian reconnaissance procedures. Post-action analysis within the 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division identified the core failure. Reliance on a single Orlan 10 drone sweep to validate an attack corridor, without ground-level confirmation, without signals intelligence cross-reference, without accounting for the possibility that Ukrainian forces had deliberately concealed their presence. The assessment recommended mandatory 48-hour surveillance windows before any armored advance. Continuous drone coverage, supplemented by ground reconnaissance patrols, and electronic warfare sweeps. Whether these recommendations were implemented remains unclear. According to sources familiar with Ukrainian intelligence assessments, subsequent Russian operations in the sector showed only partial adoption of the new procedures. For Ukrainian tactical doctrine, the Pokrovsk corridor ambush confirmed what many commanders had argued for months, that small dispersed anti-tank teams operating under strict emissions control could defeat armored formations many times their size. The key was patience, concealment, and the integration of multiple weapon systems: guided missiles for the initial strike, FPV drones for exploitation, mortars for area denial. The 93rd Brigade published an internal lessons learned document within 2 weeks of the engagement. Its conclusions were circulated across the Ukrainian armed forces. The document emphasized 3 principles. First, the ambush position must be occupied days before the expected attack, not hours. Russian drone surveillance operates on predictable cycles, and positions must be established between cycles with enough time for thermal signatures to dissipate and camouflage to settle. Second, communication must be hardwired. Any electronic emission, radio, cellular, even a personal phone accidentally left powered, can compromise the entire position. Field telephones connected by wire are primitive, but they are invisible to Russian electronic warfare systems. Third, the kill zone must be integrated. Anti-tank missiles alone are insufficient. The ambush must include pre-registered mortar fire, FPV drone support, and a withdrawal plan. The anti-tank teams create the initial shock. Drones and mortars prevent recovery. The withdrawal plan ensures the teams survive to fight again. Western defense analysts noted the engagement's broader implications. A column of 14 tanks and 6 IFVs represents significant combat power, roughly a reinforced company, with an equipment value exceeding $50 million. It was neutralized in 11 minutes by 4 teams of 4 soldiers each, equipped with weapons costing a fraction of the vehicles they destroyed. A single Stugna-P missile costs approximately $20,000. A T-72B3 modernization costs approximately $3 million. The exchange ratio is devastating. The FPV drones that finished off immobilized vehicles cost between $300 and $500 each. The BMP-2s they destroyed cost over $500,000. This arithmetic has implications that extend beyond Ukraine. Every military in the world that operates armored formations is watching these engagements and recalculating. The question isn't whether tanks are obsolete. They aren't. Not when properly employed with combined arms support, air cover, and electronic warfare protection. The question is whether the era of the armored column advance, the concentrated push of heavy vehicles along a single axis, is over. The Pokrovsk corridor suggests it might be. There's one detail from the intercepted Russian communications that deserves attention. When the battalion commander was calling for air support, he was told that helicopter assets were unavailable due to the previous week's losses. 2 K-52s, Russia's most advanced attack helicopter, had been shot down by Ukrainian air defense systems operating near Pokrovsk. This is the compounding effect of attrition. Losses in one engagement create vulnerabilities in the next. The helicopters lost the previous week weren't just 2 aircraft. They were the air cover that should have protected the armored column. Their absence turned a difficult ambush into an unsurvivable one. If those K-52s had been available, the calculus changes. Attack helicopters can suppress anti-tank positions, provide overwatch for retreating vehicles, and force Ukrainian drone operators to take cover. The column might still have taken heavy losses, but it might have extracted some of its vehicles and crews. Instead, the column was alone on that road. No air support, no artillery preparation, no electronic warfare to detect or jam Ukrainian communications, no ground reconnaissance ahead of the formation, just 20 armored vehicles driving into fog and silence. Comment ambush if you think Russian command should have known what was waiting. The Russian lieutenant colonel who ordered the advance was reportedly relieved of his command within a week. His replacement inherited a battalion that had lost a third of its armored strength in a single engagement. Morale among surviving crews collapsed. According to intercepted communications from subsequent weeks, tank crews in the sector began refusing to advance along roads without extensive preparation, demanding drone sweeps, artillery preparation, and engineer reconnaissance before moving. This is the hidden cost of tactical defeat. Not just the vehicles lost, but the psychological impact on surviving crews. A tanker who watched 8 vehicles from his column burn in 11 minutes does not forget. He doesn't charge boldly down the next road. He hesitates. He questions orders. He slows down. Multiply that across a front line, and tactical defeats become operational paralysis. Subscribe if you want to see how these battlefield realities continue to reshape modern warfare. There are those who argue the Pokrovsk ambush proves armored warfare is dead, that tanks are just expensive coffins. This assessment is wrong, but understandable. What the ambush proves is something more specific and more important. It proves that armored forces operating without combined arms integration, without adequate reconnaissance, without air cover, and without electronic warfare support, are fatally vulnerable. A column of tanks alone is not an offensive weapon. It's a target. The T-72B3 is not a bad tank. Its 125mm smoothbore gun can destroy any Ukrainian armored vehicle in service. Its explosive reactive armor, when properly maintained, can defeat older anti-tank missiles. Its fire control system, modernized in the B3 variant, allows engagement of targets at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. None of that mattered on February 9th, because none of it was relevant to the threat the column actually faced. The tanks never identified a target to shoot at. They never saw the missile teams. They never engaged. They drove into a kill zone and died. This is the lesson. Not that tanks are obsolete, but that the way Russia employed them in the Pokrovsk corridor, as an independent mass pushed down a single road without preparation or support, belongs to another century. February 9th, 2026. Southeastern approach to Pokrovsk. 11 minutes that cost Russia 8 armored vehicles, dozens of casualties, and 19 days of operational paralysis. 4 Ukrainian anti-tank teams, 16 soldiers, copper wire, and patience. The corridor is quiet now. The burned hulks are still there. Black shapes against white snow, visible on satellite imagery, rusting in the spring thaw. A monument to what happens when commanders trust drones more than judgment. When they mistake silence for safety. When they send armor down a road without asking the only question that matters. What if someone is watching and we just can't see them?